All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. We are here with the man, the myth, the legend, one of the OGs of the Tesla community, Mr. Warren Redlick. Joining us from Japan. Warren, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Nagoya, Japan, home of Toyota.
So, and Toyota just adopted the charging standard for Tesla.
Yes.
Great. So we've had a lot of I wouldn't say a lot, but I think I've done 2 or 3 videos interviewing people that had either sold out of their entire Tesla position, were thinking of selling, or were just incredibly bearish on what they heard in earnings. And so because we had those pieces of content on the channel, I thought it would only be right to introduce someone who is bullish, who I believe understands the company better than most people, who's been an investor for a long time, and who can probably dissect earnings from a bullish standpoint in a better way than most average people can just understand factory delays or things of that nature. There's probably a deeper story. And that's why we've got Warren on the podcast. So Warren, I want to start the conversation with this question. Tesla stock obviously fell, a bad month. I think 20% down in a month, lost about 130 billion in market cap over the past 30 days. The main problem with earnings that most investors felt was that Cybertruck's not going to be free cash flow positive for the next 18 months, as per Elon's words. Factories are being delayed. Production is not up as much as it needs to be. And as a result of that, having to cut prices also hurts their gross automotive margins, which inevitably hurts their revenue, having 9% year-over-year growth in this last quarter. I know I throw a lot at you, but what is your general response? And then we'll go deeper into the intricacies of that thesis, meaning that Tesla is fundamentally overvalued at $700 billion today.
Sure. I mean, my general response, I can go to specifics on some things you mentioned, but my general response is that all the things that people are describing as bad news are things that we already knew. And there was a lot of good news that we heard in the earnings call and that we saw in the shareholder deck. So it's funny when you mention that people are selling, it's like, is this the sell low, buy high strategy? Like I thought the strategy was buy low and sell high. I'm not aware of this sell low, buy high strategy as an optimal strategy for investing. You know, I've been writing this stock since 2016, so I'm an OG investor. Sure, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not as OG as others. I know I have friends who bought in 2012 or whatever, and you know, there's YouTubers who've been doing it. You know, Rob Maurer, for example, Dave Lee, been doing it longer than I have, but if you've been writing it since 2016, you've seen massive swings, and nothing that happened changed my perspective on what I think is going to happen in 2030, 2031, 2032. If you're worried about, and Cybertruck, sorry, you mentioned Cybertruck. I just have to hit on Cybertruck first. Cybertruck was never going to be a really significant portion of Tesla revenue and profit. You know, they had told us before, and they reiterated it now. They're aiming for 250,000 units a year. Well, the goal for Tesla in 2030 is 20 million units. Cybertruck is not like the vehicle, the product that's going to carry the company into the future. Cybertruck is a fun product they decided to make, and it will be a big, you know, people are concerned about the brand. Think about the impact of Cybertruck on brand. That is going to be a huge positive for brand, to have Cybertruck, to have these stainless steel trucks on the road and people going, what the hell is that? You know,
I agree. So let's stick on Cybertruck as our first segment, and then we'll get into some other stuff. So Elon said it won't be free. He kind of told investors to calm down, won't be free cash flow positive for 18 months. And
no, wait. I got to stop you right there. He did not say that.
I can actually read you the quote, because this one I've got the receipt for.
He said it's going to take 18 months to fully ramp, and it's going to be a struggle early. I don't think he said it won't be cash flow positive in 12 months.
He says it will take a year to 18 months before it's a significant positive cash flow contributor.
Okay, that's different from it's going to be the way you say it. It won't be cash flow positive for 18 months is not what he said.
I mean, he says it will take a year to 18 months before it's a significant positive cash flow contributor. Meaning it could be cash flow positive, but significant for earnings, which is what investors care about. Right. And that's the gist I'm getting from him. I guess my question.
New. But wait, that's not new. It's not new that it takes 12 to 18 months to ramp.
Well, so then why did the market? I mean, I don't think that's the only reason the market sold off, but investors didn't like that. I mean, is there an explanation for why investors sold off the stock? Because maybe there was a weird perception that Cybertruck was going to be positive, and that's Elon's fault at the end of the day. That is Tesla, the company's fault, right?
I'm going to be prickly when you say that's investors didn't like that. Like, well, Jason DeBolt is an investor and he's not worried about it. I'm an investor and I'm not worried about it. Dave Lee's not an investor. He's not worried about it.
I'm talking about the street.
Who are these quote investors?
People
there's no
the
street. There is no the street. There are people who claim to speak for Wall Street, like Gary Black. Well, I talk to portfolio managers and they say, how many portfolio managers does he know? And how many are there on Wall Street? He talks to 2 or 3 guys who may or may not actually be on Wall Street. For all we know, they're in his imagination. Right. We don't know what the street is thinking. We don't, because the street isn't a monolithic entity. There are people on Wall Street who are looking for short-term, I'm not going to see profit growing in the next quarter, and that's my target. If you're looking for, I've said this many times, if you are looking for a stock, for a company that's going to report consistent earnings quarter after quarter, then Tesla's not your stock. If you're looking for a company that's going to deliver massive growth over the long term and game-changing, life-changing, revolutionary innovation, and with the kind of CEO who delivers that kind of stuff is the kind of CEO who's going to say things that scare you sometimes, right? You're not going to get the staid, boring CEO for the company that's changing the world. Steve Jobs was not all sunshine and rainbows, right? You're just not getting that. If somebody's going to change the world, they're going to rattle your cage sometimes.
Okay, so I mean, how do you feel? It's been 4 years since we heard about Cybertruck. Like, if it's not going to be really significant for the next 12 months, do you think that's a bad thing for Tesla, at least?
I don't think it's ever going to be a significant thing for Tesla. I think it's going to be significant for branding as soon as it goes on the street. But it's not. Look, if they're going to produce 250,000 units a year, and optimistically they go to 500,000 units a year.
Correct.
If the vehicle side of the business is 20 million units a year, then 500,000 units is not very important, right? Model Y at 2 million units is way more important than 500,000 Cybertrucks, and next generation vehicle at what I think is going to be 8 million units a year is way more important than Model Y. So the obsession with Cybertruck is cool, right? Cybertruck is going to be great for the brand. People are going to see that thing on the street and they're going to say, what the hell is that? And they're going to want to find out more about it. And that's a game changer for public perception, like way more than running a Super Bowl ad, right? Just having Cybertruck on the streets, people are going to go nuts when they see this thing. Some people are going to hate it. Some people are going to love it, but they're going to be talking about it. So that's the value of Cyber. And of course, like I have 2 Cybertruck orders. I want my Cybertruck, right? I'm not, if you're a nerd like me, like this is the coolest thing on the planet. I want one. Right.
So you don't think Cybertruck's a catalyst? You don't think in terms of short term, next 1 or 2 years, you don't think it's not?
I think it's a catalyst in driving buyer interest in buying Teslas in the short to medium term. But it's not when you're looking at the long-term value of the company. If you're looking at 2030, right, say Tesla's going to deliver 20 million cars and they're going to deliver 1 terawatt hour of energy storage. And they're going to have self-driving cars and they're going to have robots walking around. Well, what percentage of the business is, let's say, 500,000 units of Cybertruck? It's like 1 or 2% of revenue. Like, why would you obsess about 1 or 2% of revenue when you're looking at the future? If you're looking, and even in 2025, let's say they deliver 250,000 units in 2025, which I think they might pull off 250,000 units in 2025. Well, how many vehicles do we expect them to deliver in 2025? 3 million? Maybe close to 3 million units. So what's 250,000 out of 3 million is like small, and then you're delivering more and more energy. So as a share of the business, it's probably less than 10% of the business in 2025, and it shrinks to 2% of the business in 2030. So if you're long term, like it's cool, like I said, it's going to look like nothing else on the road. It's going to draw attention. It's a better advertisement than any advertisement you could do. When you do an ad, you want people talking about it. Well, people driving around in Cybertrucks, people are going to be talking about that thing. It's going to be parked in a supercharger at a turnpike toll stop, turnpike rest area.
Let's move on from Cybertruck then, because your perspective is a bit different than what I mean. When I heard Gary Black go on CNBC last week, he said the only reason I'm owning the stock is because there's catalysts coming for growth. I'm a growth investor, and one of those catalysts is Cybertruck. So what I'm thinking from the institutional side is they really think this is going to ramp up. And to you, you're like, it's a branding play. It's not really an earnings play.
No, but wait a minute. Did they say they were going for 250,000 units?
I don't know what they said. All I know is the stock's selling off, and the Cybertruck announcement seemed to upset people because Elon said in 18 months it's not.
I'm sorry. To be clear, he said they expected to produce 250,000 units, to hit a 250,000 a year run rate in May of 18 months, which is May of 2025. That's what he said they expect to do. Well, they have told us that their goal is 20 million. They've been consistently said again and again and again, we're going to produce 20 million vehicles in 2030. If you know, Gary is not talking about growth in 2030. Gary is talking about growth in Q2 of 2024. Gary does not see 2030. He has no vision for the company. None of these guys have vision. They don't see the future the way that long-term investors see the future. If you watch Dave Lee, if you listen to Jason DeBolt, if you watch Rob Maurer, if you look at what the long-term plans for Tesla are, what they told us at Battery Day, what they tell us at Investor Day, Robin Denholm speaking at Investor Day, was it the shareholder? I think it was the shareholder meeting I was at. She reiterated the 20 million units by 2030. That's the goal. And they've told us they're going for 250,000 Cybertrucks. And I'm optimistic, and I think they might get to 500,000. That's trivial when you're making 20 million vehicles a year.
Okay, so let's move on to some of the broader problems of the call. So one of the other things, and again, the reason I'm asking this is because I want the bull perspective on why the bear perspective is incorrect here. The bear perspective is Elon felt very deflated when it came to macro, and his argument was that interest rates look like they're going to stay higher for longer, or at least 4 or 5%. And as a result of that, it's going to be hard to finance a car. As a result, they've aggressively cut prices. It doesn't seem like that necessarily will be stopping, even if it stabilizes, which means margins will suffer. As a result of that, earnings per share, revenue will suffer. The free cash flow was not the best this quarter. At a $700 billion market cap, what is the argument here for why, if they will have less revenue and less margins, and 84% of the revenue for Tesla currently is cars, that it's a cheap dip to buy?
Well, okay, so I'm not a person who times the market. So the idea that this is a cheap, that I don't buy dips. When I have free cash, I buy Tesla stock. That's my strategy. I bought at 400. I bought it, I bought at 160. I don't care. When I have money, I'm going to buy the stock. I'm not looking at, what interest rates or margins are going to be in 2024 or 2025.
Yeah, but Warren, doesn't that matter? Because I know, like, we all have lived in a zero interest rate world for a long time, but like, it is $938 a month to buy a Tesla. Like, that's a lot of money. And at some level, people are just not going to pay that, right? So doesn't that have any impact in terms of people
which
buying
Tesla are we talking about?
I think it was the Model Y, the one that I saw.
Okay, well, what's the Model Y's competition? Does it cost more to buy, or more or less to buy Model Y's competition?
No, my broader argument is, if people don't want to spend that much money, if we have a recession, things of those nature, which I know they might be silly concerns, but they do matter in the context of the current valuation the company is at. Like, I think valuation needs to be somewhat of a factor in the discussion. If the revenue will slow down, earnings per share will slow down, but volume increases, why does that mean this valuation is justified?
The valuation is justified by the long-term future, not temporary macro conditions that will be gone in a year or two. Like I said, if you're focused on, look, interest rates are going to be high for the next 12 months. Well, that has nothing to do with what's happening in 2030. And one of the challenges is this idea that you can predict what the stock price is going to do over the next 12 months, so you can identify when you're in a dip and you can buy the dip, and then you'll ride it up on the rise and then you'll sell at the peak. Timing the market is the wrong strategy. It is a persistently well demonstrated wrong strategy. The idea that you're smarter than the market and you can time the market, it's very popular. There's lots of YouTube channels that brag about, here's how you time the market. And look how successful I was. And if you have 1,000 monkeys timing the market, some of them are going to, like 5 or 10 of them are going to become rich, but they're still monkeys, and we're monkeys. And,
I agree with that. But don't you think, like, for example, if someone bought at 290 or 300 and they have to wait maybe a year or 2 years to break even on that, just to begin the process of making gains, like, that does matter the time you buy the stock at. Wait, so you don't think it matters at all? So the person who bought at 414 at the top, you don't think that matters to them that they bought at the top, even if they have a 10-year horizon on the company?
If you have a 10-year horizon, the price today doesn't matter. Are you selling this week? Are you selling? If your plan is,
there is an opportunity cost to capital, right?
Yeah,
but buying at 415 means you could have doubled your shares if you bought at 200. So you made a mistake.
What were you going to do with the money? Were you going to hold the money in cash? You're playing timing games, and timing games don't work. You buy over the, the most popular approach, which I don't follow, is dollar cost averaging. Dollar cost averaging assumes you have a flow of cash coming in and you buy stock as it goes up and down. I just buy, I don't have a steady flow of cash. I get cash in lumps. And when I get cash, I buy the stock. And I don't pretend to know whether the stock is at a peak now or at a low later. You can think you're at a peak and then it dips like 5% and then it jumps 50% and you didn't buy because you thought you weren't in the dip. You can't, there's lots of people who will tell you how to play the timing game, but they're all wrong. The way to play the timing game is to not play.
The market cap at 700 billion, you're saying look to 2030, not now. Let's say the market cap goes to 300 billion. For you, you don't care 700, 300 trillion. You just care about long term. Like that has no implication for how you consider buying the company.
The market cap falls to 300 billion. I'll sell a kidney to buy more stock.
No, that's great for you, but the people that are taking those losses, buying it at 210.
You haven't lost, but wait, okay, just the concept of a loss. You haven't lost until you sold.
Yeah, but you're technically down, could be hundreds of thousands of dollars. And unless you have the money to DCA and get a better average, that sucks, right? For anybody, that sucks. Like you picked the wrong time. Now, granted, if you really have that long term, that's great. But to look out 15, 20 years and be down hundreds of thousands of dollars, it's not the funnest thing in the world, I would say.
Do you follow Jason DeVolt?
Yeah. I mean, he's on Twitter. I don't look at his content all the time, but he's on Twitter. I follow him.
He loses like $1 million when the stock goes down.
Yeah, and that's not every person, Warren. That's a one individual who got rid of his house to buy more stock. Like that's not the average investor.
Well, I'm not an average investor. I'm a long-term investor. And I will be clear, if you are playing the game, I'm going to tell a story. So I have a family member who had hundreds of thousands of dollars in a savings account paying like 0% interest. And I said, hey, why don't you buy an ETF that invests in the S&P 500? And so she put like $100,000 into an ETF in the S&P 500. And a week later, she sold because she couldn't handle the volatility of the S&P 500. If you can't handle volatility, then Tesla's not your stock. It's a volatile stock. It's going to go up. It's going to go down. And you can't, and the idea that somebody can predict whether it's going to go up or it's going down. But if you're the kind of, I think this is a key distinction. If you are an investor who's not comfortable with volatility, then buy utility stocks. Okay. But if you're looking for growth stocks are going to be volatile. You are not going to get, over the top growth with companies that are going to deliver. It's like alpha and beta. I mean, I did go to Stanford Business School, but I didn't focus on this stuff. But if you're an alpha beta person, if you're looking for alpha, you're going to get risk that goes with growth. You're going to get volatility that goes with growth. When you look at Tesla and you say, okay, wait a minute, let's look out to 2030. Is there a company that's going to do better at growing in the car market and the energy market than Tesla? Do you see another company or companies out there that are going to outcompete Tesla in these areas? Is there a company that's going to do better in real world AI than Tesla? Is there a company that's going to do better in robotics and robotaxi? I don't see any competition on the horizon. The scenario that's bad for Tesla is bad for everybody, is that we enter like worldwide economic decline, which I don't think is out of.
So I have another scenario that's bad for Tesla. So let's stick from 2023 to, I guess, 2028 instead of looking super, super long term. What is going on with FSD? Because the volumes increasing to turn on the spigot on FSD is awesome, and that can justify the automotive gross margins coming down and the revenue acceleration. But if that doesn't happen in the next couple of years, I don't know where the growth is coming from. It has to come from either the SaaS-like margins on FSD or from more cars, but for more cars, probably not going to happen. So how do you reconcile what's going on with FSD right now?
Well, there's a bunch of questions in there. The first thing is, let's assume there's no FSD. Let's assume it never happens. Okay. But Tesla sells 20 million cars in 2030 and the energy business grows 50x. Okay.
That's a pretty big assumption for that 20 million though, Warren, right? Like,
okay, let's suppose they only get to 10. Well, okay, so how many cars do you think they're going to sell in 2030 if they don't?
I don't think they're
FSD?
selling 20 million, and I'm someone who's not bearish on. I don't even know if it's 10 million, quite frankly, Warren. I mean, like,
okay, let's say it's 8 million.
If they're going to do 1.8 million this year, then I mean, you're expecting what, a 30% CAGR every year to get to that 20 million? Like that's a lot of
50% CAGR.
Right.
But
and
it's not smooth. This is the thing. This is something people don't get. And I've been saying this, and people aren't getting it. Like Model Y is approaching its limit. You know, Elon called it the law of large numbers. It's not really the correct application of the law of large numbers, but it's in the ballpark. You know, the maximum you're going to get out of Model Y and Model 3, we're approaching those. And Cybertruck is going to deliver incremental growth, but it's not going to deliver outsized growth because, you know, they're shooting for 250,000 units a year. And like I said, I think they'll get to 500,000 units, but that's still not the kind of growth you need. There's a vehicle coming that they've been hinting at. They talked about it a little in the earnings call. It's called the next generation vehicle platform. They're working on it in Texas. They've got a space for 500,000 a year in Berlin that they've already filed permits for. They've got the factory in Mexico that's a little slower than before because they'd shifted not because something happened in Mexico, but because, as mentioned in the biography, Elon decided, let's build it in Texas first. And they're probably going to build it in Shanghai. Right.
Wait, but Warren, you're also assuming these factories start popping up expeditiously in the next 7 years to get the output.
Right? No, I'm talking about factories that already exist.
But so the 8 factories that exist, I think the number is 8. You think that's going to produce 20 million in the next?
No. We're not at 20 million yet. We're talking about growth over the next few years. Okay. And my point is that I don't expect a lot of growth in 2024, and I expect we're going to start seeing more growth in 2025 with the next generation vehicle.
Right.
Because it's going to take a while to engineer the next generation vehicle where it's going to go. But, you know, if your primary vehicle is a $40,000 to $50,000 car in the Model Y, and then you're going to come out with a vehicle that I think is going to be a $20,000 vehicle in 2025, that vehicle is going to be very high volume, right? That's the high volume. When you're looking at the vehicle side of the business, the next generation vehicle is where the volume growth is going to be, and that starts in 2025, and that's going to grow a lot faster. That vehicle is going to turn over much higher volumes than you know. Model Y certainly, you know, hits a certain point where it's like you can only sell so many more Model Ys, but the next generation vehicle platform is going to sell much higher volumes.
Okay, so then speaking on that, it's been 4 years.
You're still missing the energy side.
Well, we'll talk about energy in a second, but it's been 4 years, no Cybertruck. What makes you think by 2025 this $25,000 car is going to be up and running? Because I think that says something. The Cybertruck, remember, when they announced it in 2019, they announced it. They tried to make the easiest design, which is why it ended up turning up like a box in order to make production easier. And then obviously in the past 4 years, life happens and, you know, it became much more difficult. I mean, by 2025, 2026, you think a $25,000 vehicle is just magically going to come to the markets?
I don't think it's magic, and I think it's a $20,000 vehicle. I can't say this enough. People obsessing about it being a $25,000 vehicle. Drew Baglino said half the cost of the Model 3 Model Y platform. And the bottom end of the Model 3 Model Y platform is $40,000 or less. So half of that would be $20,000. I just saw an estimate of the manufacturing cost of the Model 3 is $32,000, the standard range Model 3. Well, 50% of that cost would be $16,000. And that means you can deliver a vehicle at $20,000 with 20% margins. So I think we're going to see
but I feel like, you know, management may say something, but to assume that actually, again, they said Cybertruck would be out way before it's like, you know, like I feel like there's a lot of assumptions being baked in to this idea that 20 million cars will happen because this $20,000 car you're saying will happen because the Mexico plant will be up and running in the next couple months. Like
I didn't say the Mexico plant would be up and running. I said they're in Texas first.
Okay, so you think
because Walter Isaacson wrote in the biography. Like, did you read the biography?
No, but I'm not going to assume my investment decision on what Walter, who's trying to make a really good book and sell copies, is saying about Elon. You know,
no, but when
I can take little pieces from it, but I'm not going to form.
But when we're talking about the Q3 earnings call and people are reacting, oh, Mexico's delayed, this is a problem for the next generation vehicles. Like, no, we already knew that Mexico was delayed because that was already in the book. They told us that, you know, Walter Isaacson told us that like 2 or 3 months ago that Mexico was delayed because Elon decided we're going to start with the next generation vehicle in Texas. And they said it, that they're working on the next generation vehicle. They said in the call the next generation vehicle is going to be a lot easier to engineer than Cybertruck, that Cybertruck has tremendous engineering challenges because they decided to make a crazy vehicle with 14 inches of suspension travel. Do you have a concept of how hard it is to make a vehicle with 14? I don't even know. I mean, I know my Model X Plaid has like 2 or 3 inches of suspension travel. I'm trying to wrap my head around 14 inches of suspension travel. They're making a very complex vehicle. It's very hard to manufacture, but the next generation vehicle, they said, is going to be utilitarian. It's going to be much easier to make, and they're making progress on it. So but that's the long-term growth story is not Cybertruck. The long-term growth story is the next generation vehicle, energy, FSD, and bot.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about some of those call options I guess people have on Tesla that you don't think are call options. You think are like the bot, for example. Do you think the investors, like, so the Jonas Brothers band put out this whole thesis about $550 because of Dojo and all that stuff. I'm not as smart enough to understand it. Do you think that makes sense, taking all that future hypothetical situations and factoring it into the valuation today? Or do you think, look, it's a car company, they're selling cars, and that stuff might happen, it might not?
Okay, let's talk about bot and let's talk about Robotaxi. I think the so-called Wall Street thinking does not take into account the value of Robotaxi and the value of bot. And you have to wrap your head around, well, what is a self-driving car worth? And you look at an Uber, and an Uber charges $2.50 to $3 a mile on average in the United States. Well, if you don't have to pay a driver and you're using an electric vehicle instead of a gas vehicle, and you operate the vehicle 12 hours a day instead of 4 hours a day, how much additional revenue does that generate, and how much additional profit does that generate? And you just do some math and you say, you can make it really simple. Say the vehicle drives 100,000 miles a year and it does 50,000 miles in rides, and it only charges $1 a mile. So it massively outcompetes Uber and Lyft, right? I think in the short term, you're probably talking about $2 a mile, and it drives Uber and Lyft out of business. But once you start doing them in volume, you're charging, let's say, $1 a mile. Well, what's the operating cost, all in cost, including amortization, insurance, everything? It's about 15 cents a mile. So you do 100,000 miles, that costs you $15,000. You get 50,000 miles paid, that's $50,000 in revenue. So you have $35,000 in profit per vehicle. And I think this is massively underestimating the profit story, but you've got $35,000 a vehicle. Now you have 10 million vehicles. Now you got $350 billion in gross profit. Right. And this is undercounting the potential, because the Robotaxi vehicle is going to be 10 cents a mile, and you're probably going to do closer to $60,000 in revenue. So you really look at $50,000 in profit, gross profit, and a $500 billion gross profit. But what was Tesla's gross profit last year? Like 20 billion?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you go to 400 billion in gross profit, you just 20x gross profit, and that's only on Robotaxi. Right. And you go to bot and you ask yourself
real quick on Robotaxi. Robotaxi assumes the volume of 10 million, 20 million, whatever actually happens, correct? Like, you can't do it on a couple million cars because you need those fleet of vehicles.
Well, okay.
So like, you got to win the production argument, which maybe you'll be right on, but that is inevitable for Robotaxi.
What part of this is hard?
I mean, I don't see this 10 million that you're casually throwing around as easily as you say it is. And one of us is going to be right, but it has to be there for Robotaxi to be a thing, right?
Is the 10 million problem demand, or is the 10 million problem production?
I think both. I think we're in an uncertain economic environment. In the next 7 years, it's not going to be 2008 to 2014 with 0% interest rates and disinflate. Like, there's a lot of things going on that might make it harder to sell 10 million cars.
How many more people will ride in taxis if taxis cost 1/3 the price they cost now?
A lot, but you need those cars on the road, right? You need that production.
Okay, so we solved the demand side. The demand side is, if you're able to get the price of a ride down to $1 a mile, you've solved the demand side. So we're really only talking about the production side, right?
Correct. But getting that down to $1 a mile, Uber charges like $2-3 a mile. So
$3 a mile.
Right. So you need a shit ton of cars in order to get that demand side. So all of this rests on production, in my opinion. If you don't have the cars,
so we're leaving the demand side out. If you can get the price down to $1 a mile, you're good.
Correct.
So then, and I think we're clear that the cost of operating an EV without a driver, like 15 cents a mile on the current Model 3 standard range or Model Y standard range, and it probably drops to 10 cents a mile on the next generation vehicle, because it's going to be smaller, it's going to have lower cost, amortization is less, lithium iron phosphate battery is going to land, whatever. There's all kinds of reasons why that price drops. So you can see at $1 a mile, you can see that the profit story is there. So now the question is, if you're going to make $35,000 a year on a vehicle, how hard is it for you to make more vehicles, right? You're going to make your money back in less than a year on each vehicle you produce. You're going to make your money back in about half a year. So you're going to produce as many as you can. I don't understand where the production challenge is. There's a question about battery supply. I think there's a legitimate question about battery supply, but I think the next generation vehicle in Robotaxi form might have a 40 kilowatt hour pack, and it's going to have lithium iron phosphate, which CATL is scaling up like crazy, and LG Chem is scaling up like crazy. I think there's a legitimate question out there about whether there will be enough batteries to support the ecosystem that we're talking about? That is probably the most legitimate question. But CATL and LG Chem and Panasonic and all the battery companies and BYD are answering that question, claiming they're going to increase battery production more than enough to satisfy the number of batteries needed for 10 million robotaxis. So, I mean, 10 million robotaxis is not that much. I mean, if Tesla's producing 2 million this year and we're talking about having 10 million robotaxis in 2030, well, they're doing 2 million a year now. That's more than 5 years away. That's 10 million vehicles. I don't understand where the problem is.
If a robotaxi becomes a thing, do you think there's any need for people to buy cars anymore? Or buy Teslas in general?
The way I see the future, when you get the price of the ride down below $1 a mile, down below 70 cents a mile, which is the point right now where the average American spends on their car, the lower the price comes down, the more people say, you know what, I don't want to bother owning a car anymore. And when it drops to 50 cents a mile, which is still profitable, right? For the robotaxi owner, 50 cents a mile is still profitable. Now, the vast majority of the population decides not to bother owning cars anymore. So I think that wealthy people will still choose to own cars. I will probably continue. Well, actually, I don't have a car with me in Japan, so I guess it depends where I'm living. But I think wealthy people will still choose to own cars, just like some wealthy people choose to own horses. But the average individual is going to say, why am I going to bother owning a car when I can just press a button on my phone and a ride shows up in 5 minutes and takes me where I want to go, and I never have to change tires? People don't think about all the hassles of owning a car. You have to get a license. You have to get a registration. You have to get insurance. That's another thing that people aren't talking about. Car dealership guy talked about this. The price of car insurance has been going up.
Yep.
Our car insurance rates. My ex-wife, maintains my daughter, the Tesla my daughter owns, and she has her own car, and their car insurance rates just jumped. So there's all kinds of
mine's jumped by 25% too.
Yeah. So there's all kinds of things beyond just car payments that are having a macro effect on people's decisions to buy vehicles in the short term. So, but I think that by and large, a robotaxi world, they're not going to need insurance. They're going to self-insure. Tesla will self-insure. They're not going to crash, so there's not going to be much to insure.
Okay, I want to ask this question because I tweeted about this, and this will get back to FSD and robotaxi. Would you be comfortable letting I don't know how old your daughter is, 16, 20 years old, but get into
my daughters are adults now.
Okay. Would you be comfortable letting your adult daughter visiting you in Japan, taking a robotaxi from the airport with no driver, come visit your house in Japan?
When the robotaxi software is better than human, hell yes.
Okay, and so now here's my question. I'm assuming there needs to be...
I drove my daughters in a Tesla with... My younger daughter drives my Model 3 with FSD beta. I drove my daughters and their friends with FSD beta. I trusted it to the extent that I let it drive, but I supervised it. But it's going to get to a point where you don't need to supervise it anymore. And yes, once it's ready to go.
That part, and this is why I need the bullish case. I don't necessarily agree with that. For a robotaxi network to exist, FSD has to be solved. Elon said the difference between Tesla being worth a lot or zero is FSD. So that is a central point of agreement we can all understand. Now, there needs to be a lot of guinea pigs that, quite frankly, are going to fucking die in some FSD crashes. It's going to happen because there is no way you get FSD to be perfect unless some people take the fall. And those people taking one for the team, I get it. Bravo. Great job. You took one for the team for Elon and humanity, but it's not going to be your daughter. It's not going to be my loved ones. So who's doing that? Who's being the guinea pigs for this FSD?
Are you suggesting that people don't die in traffic accidents with human drivers?
No, but that's irrelevant because yes, people will die regardless. I'm saying who's going to willingly get into a car that has no driver and let them be the guinea pigs for this thing crashing or not crashing to get the data for Tesla to make it better.
Who's riding in Waymo and Cruise now?
A bunch of guinea pigs that in my opinion are dumb. Like
how many of them have died?
I don't know, Warren, but what I'm saying, if you do this globally, internationally, robotaxis, at least in the United States, forget globally, there's going to have to be a lot of these cars on the road getting a lot of data. And I don't know. I don't know if it's that easy. Like you just said, you wouldn't let your daughter get in one, or you would let her get in after it's proven. So it's a simple question. Who's going to be doing all that proving for the next couple of years to make this thing a reality?
I've ridden in a Waymo. Like I've been the guinea pig.
You would be a guinea pig for Tesla then.
I took 2 trips in a Waymo in Arizona. I am a guinea pig. I've driven 50,000 miles on FSD beta.
Yeah, but no, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about no driver. Like, because you still have to have your hands, right? Like, you have to have some level of control. A Robotaxi network is no one's in the driver's seat. Like, this is
I'm,
not complicated. It has
I'm
to
going
be
to tell you.
perfect.
I'm going to tell you a dirty secret about some FSD beta drivers.
Okay, here
Some
we
of
go.
us figure out ways where there are periods of time where we're paying a lot less attention than you would like to believe we pay attention.
Okay.
We find ways of avoiding the nag one way or the other, and we let the car drive for extended periods of time. And I will tell you this, at least once, I think it's twice, but I remember one incident clearly where FSD beta saved a pedestrian's life. That I did not see the guy, and the car stopped.
I'm
And I
sure
didn't
it's going to be really good for humanity long term. I'm
I
just
was
saying it
about
seems like
I was about to hit the accelerator pedal because I thought it was slowing down for no reason. And before I hit the accelerator pedal, I saw the guy. He walked out from behind a bush right into the middle of the road in a spot where a human would not normally cross, and the car saw him and stopped. The idea that they're going to unleash FSD without supervision and it's going to be more dangerous than human drivers is vastly misunderstanding the plan. The plan is that FSD beta will go full on, no supervision when it's safer than human. And I mean, I'll just ask you the simple question. Do you have children?
I don't, not yet.
Okay. If you had children, would you put them in an Uber with some strange driver?
Yes, if they had 5 stars and they had done over
You got a
1,000 trips.
15-year-old daughter. Oh, they have to have 5 stars, and your
They have to have
daughter's
5 stars and they have to do 1,000 trips, and that data I can see, so I can easily.
But your daughter has to. What about when your daughter's 15 or 17 and she's making the decision for herself, and you're not there, and she's.
I would tell her, hey, make sure they have 5 stars and they've done over 1,000.
And you trust your daughter to listen. And you have daughters. You don't have daughters.
I will raise my daughter to follow basic instructions. Yes, like that. Like, to me, like, that's just way easier to conceptualize in my head than a car that has no driver and her hopping in and that thing just working perfectly.
Are you gonna tell her not to go to 5 stars? Are you gonna tell her not to go to frat parties when she's in college?
No, I think it's apples to oranges. Look, if my daughter is coming home from a soccer game in some country because she's an international soccer superstar and she's coming back home and she's at the airport and she needs to take an Uber because I'm at work, I can't pick her up, I would tell her, hey, this is how you take an Uber, versus getting in a Robotaxi and then she might not make it home because something fucking happens that is the Robotaxi's fault. I mean, I think that's like, I personally would never let that happen. I would never let my mom get in a Robotaxi. I would never I just wouldn't let it happen until the data is so conclusive.
Having adult children, I've learned that you don't get to control how they live their lives, and they're going to make.
But Warren, I don't think you can make that generalization over a small thing like make sure your Uber has 5 stars. Like, it's a gross generalization, right? But the broader point is, what if that FSD Robotaxi fucks up? That's not a risk I don't think I'm willing to take her. I don't know.
Well, she's in a Tesla. She's in the safest car in a crash. So if there's a crash, she can't be in a safer car. And I frankly have been in a lot of Ubers, and I've had a lot of human drivers, and I've definitely had human drivers that I thought were worse than FSD. So
yeah, I mean, look, that's fair. Okay, so let's move on to the bot. Why should the bot have any factor in today's valuation? What's the bull case for that right now?
It's harder to see that for most people. The example I like to give is, so when I was younger, I worked at a Burger King, and imagine a fast food restaurant that has 10 employees. I'm just making up numbers, but imagine a fast food restaurant that has 10 employees, and you bring in a bot, and the bot doesn't replace any one worker, but it's able to do enough tasks overall that the manager is able to reduce the staff from 10 to 9. So they're saving one laborer's expense. And let's say the laborer, when you add up everything, the wage and the workers' comp premiums and all the other expenses that go along with hiring an employee, let's say it saves them $20 an hour. Okay. So the bot works 2,000 hours a year. It saves you $40,000 on an employee. Probably the bot works 2 shifts. So it's saving you $80,000 a year. Right? So what would you pay for that bot? And let's say the bot works for 10 years. What would you pay for that bot if you were running that Burger King? I'm going to pay a lot more than $10,000 for that bot if it's going to save me $80,000 a year. Now you get to the question, what's it going to cost to manufacture a bot? Well, a Tesla car is a robot that's very complex, and it weighs like 4,000 pounds. A bot weighs 125 pounds. It's complex, but it weighs a lot less than a car. So in terms of the components that are going into it, the math that's going into it, the battery pack's going to be 2.3 kilowatt hours instead of 60 kilowatt hours or whatever. So the cost of the bot's going to be a lot less than the cost of the car. So you're probably going to be able to, and when you're mass manufacturing the bots, you're probably going to be able to mass produce them for $5,000 or $10,000 a bot. I'm predicting 5,000. But even at 10,000, if the thing's generating $80,000 in value a year, then that's a pretty big profit story. Now, the question is, do they sell the bot? Do they rent them out by the hour? Do they rent them out by the week? I don't know what the business model is there. But I think if you're making 100 million bots a year for $10,000 a pop and you're selling them for $100,000, that's a pretty good business model. So, and you can start small with just a really simple use case is you have a facility that's secure and you need somebody to patrol the perimeter. And you have 5 humans walking the perimeter and you're paying them effectively. Let's say they're costing you $20 an hour. And you say, you know what? We can have 10 bots patrol the perimeter more effectively than 5 humans. We'll have 2 humans back at the center, right? The bots will all be looking, and if they see something unusual, we'll get live video feed. The bot doesn't have to intervene. It just has to identify, hey, there's a potential threat here.
So my question is any of this factor into today's $700 billion market cap, or should it?
Well, I'm saying as a long-term investor, you have to say, what's the probability that this is going to succeed and what value is it going to generate? So when I look at Robotaxi and I look at bot, I see a high probability that they will succeed and an insanely high value. Now, if you're looking at it and you don't understand the model that I'm talking about and you don't understand the technology, then you probably should make sure you understand that technology first. You should watch AI Day and AI Day 2 again. You should watch Battery Day. You should be watching Tesla's presentation so you understand the business. You should read what ARK Invest says about these businesses. You should read what others are saying about these businesses. You should understand the progress that AI is making in various fields. You should try to process what Elon said about stacked log curves and understand what that means. And if you develop that understanding, I think it's hard to escape that these things are highly likely to succeed. But if you're not willing to invest that time and you don't have the intellectual bandwidth or whatever to really wrap your head around that prospect, then you can say, all right, let's say there's a 10% probability that they deliver this Robotaxi future and they make $400 billion a year in gross profit. Well, 10% of $400 billion a year in gross profit is $40 billion a year in gross profit. And that's double what last year's gross profit was. And it's probably more than double this year's gross profit. Right. And then the bot, like, okay, 100 million bots a year selling at $50,000 gross profit, which is probably low. Well, I think that's $500 billion a year in gross profit.
It's a lot.
That's $5 trillion a year in gross profit.
It's a lot of money if this works.
So there's a 10% chance of that happening. And I'm just saying, if you piece together, okay, these are likely scenarios. And if you play with ChatGPT at all, if you play with other AIs at all, you can see, okay, I see that AI is starting to change the game. How am I going to get in on this? I can't buy stock in OpenAI. I don't really have, I can buy Microsoft, I can buy, Apple, maybe I can buy Meta, whatever, but how am I playing this AI transition? And, what's going to matter most in the real, where's the most value going to be generated? And I think real world AI, I think that the other AIs are a good potential investment. I don't know who's going to win that. The problem with investing in other AIs is I don't know who's going to win those battles. And there may be more than one winner, just to be clear. But like if you use ChatGPT and you haven't tried Claude from Anthropic, like you should try Claude because Claude's really cool.
It's amazing, incredible. But I guess it comes down to the probability of all this happening. I know you said there's a lot of research involved, and it seems likely if you do all that research. But your point is that you're giving it a higher than 20-30% chance by 2030 this stuff really materializes.
But even if you only give it a 10% chance, the value's insane. And we still haven't talked about Tesla Energy.
Okay, let's go to Tesla Energy. What happened in this earnings that made you more bullish for Tesla Energy?
Margins went from below 20% to 24% gross margin. They made $500 million in profit on Tesla Energy in one quarter. And they're growing at somewhere between 100 and 200% a year. They're doubling or tripling every year in volume and revenue. And then you've got increasing margins. Like, well, you only have to go out a few years to realize that's a really big impact. You're not going to see a huge impact for that in 2024. But if they triple in 2024 and they triple again in 2025, and the margins go up to 30%, which none of these things are unreasonable. Well, then you can see where all of a sudden energy, like even if the car market stays slow, the demand for these utility products is really, really huge. I mean, I think they're sold out through the end of 20. I think they're sold out into 2025. I lost you. You there?
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I lost you for a second. So, the long-term prospect for Tesla, their target for 2030 is a terawatt hour. They're going to be delivering about 16 gigawatt hours this year, right? So there's like a 50x in energy in 7 years. Now, they're ramping up Lathrop now. They've got a new factory they're going to build in Shanghai, and our experience in Shanghai so far is whatever they're going to do in Shanghai is going to happen faster than whatever happens in California.
Right.
So you're going to go from what's currently 16 gigawatt hours a year to 40 gigawatt hours a year out of Lathrop. Oh no, is it 80? I think it's 40 gigawatt hours a year out of Lathrop, and then 40 gigawatt hours a year out of Shanghai. So that's 80. So that's a 5x when Shanghai's fully ramped. And it's very likely they're going to build more mega factories, more mega pack factories. It just seems obvious that the demand is there and the market is there. Like, why wouldn't they build more of them? There's all kinds of countries and utilities around the country that need this sort of backup. And especially as you're seeing solar and wind ramp up, you need battery storage to smooth the flow of energy from these renewables.
How big do you think energy could be by 2030? I mean, the bull case obviously makes a lot of sense. The whole world needs it. Tesla is the best vertically integrated supplier of it. Do you think it could be bigger than the car business, or just as big?
On a batteries used basis, yes. And on a value, like let's say a margin profit generation, leaving out FSD, yes, I think it could be bigger than cars in 2030. I think it's likely to be bigger than cars in 2030 without FSD. I just think that the odds of not having FSD, when you start talking about probabilities, like, all right, the probability that FSD is complete and we have a Robotaxi network in 2024 is starting to look low.
Mm-hmm.
But the probability that we don't have an operating Robotaxi network in 2030, I would say is very low. That's like a massive bet against AI.
Right.
Like do you drive a Tesla? Have you driven an FSD?
I've been in a couple with friends, but never drove it myself. So, but no, I drove it once. I drove my friend for like 10 minutes.
And just by the way, the answer to your question about who's going to adopt, like I drove my older daughter and 4 of her friends in my Model X, and I showed off the acceleration, and they said, please don't do that again. Because it was jarring. The acceleration in the Model X Plaid is jarring. And then I said, okay, I'm going to engage self-driving, and I double tap and the car starts driving itself. So see, the car's driving itself. And they watched for about 15 seconds, and then they went back on their phones and they just didn't care anymore.
Right.
They just trusted it. So there's a large percentage of the population that if it works for 15 seconds, they're good.
This comment real quick, the odds of not having FSD by 2030 seem pretty high. I know we talked about it, but why do you your face? I knew that would give you a reaction. Why is that reaction to this comment happen?
Where was this guy? Where was P. Morton when a week before ChatGPT had its moment? Like, why? You look at the history of AI. You look at the Google DeepMind. When it beat the AlphaGo. Watch the AlphaGo documentary. Everybody's like, oh, Go is too complicated. Computers won't be able to beat a human, blah, blah, blah. This is much, much more difficult than chess and so on and so forth. And then all of a sudden it beat the world champion in Go. Right. And it has its moment and it comes on you really fast. And it's really hard to see. Humans don't see that path well. But if you haven't ridden in a self-driving car, like I've been driving or riding in FSD beta cars for probably 2+ years now.
Right.
And I remember when it couldn't do a roundabout. I remember when it didn't see speed bumps. I remember when, all these moments where there's things that it couldn't do or it didn't do well. And it does most of those things well now. It does roundabouts. My experience last time I drove it, I haven't driven in a while now because I'm in Japan, but it was doing roundabouts about 75% of the time. It used to not do roundabouts at all. I think it's only starting to do U-turns now. I've heard reports that it's starting to do U-turns. So U-turns is coming. There's a lot of little things that it has to get down, but there's a lot of progress. And then if you understand what brought ChatGPT to where it is, it's large volumes of data and large amounts of computing power. And they are really ramping their computing power, and they're adding tremendous amounts of data, and they're getting really good at identifying what data do we need, and what challenges do we have yet to make this work. And as far as I can tell, they're just making great progress, and the progress is accelerating.
Why
I don't know what some of these things you say it's a low probability. What are you saying that makes it a low probability?
Why do you think Waymo and Cruise are even trying? Because the way I'm hearing you talk about FSD is like this is going to be the thing, and if it is the thing, then it's just licensed, right? And then Tesla makes a shit ton of money from licensing because they solved it. There's no reason for Ford to solve it. Why are Waymo and Cruise trying to solve it when they will never have the proprietary data Tesla has to be able to solve it?
That's a good question. First of all, it's possible that the people inside Waymo and Cruise know more than I do. It's likely that they know more than I do. I think it's not that I think Waymo and Cruise can't solve self-driving. I think they can certainly solve it in limited contexts, to a degree. I mean, we did have this incident where was it a Waymo or a Cruise that ran over a woman, and I know there's a whole bunch of circumstances. It was an edge case, right? Basically, the defense is it was an edge case. Somebody else ran over her first, and then we ran over her. It's like, well, okay, that's an edge case. And what we're expecting is when you throw a high volume of data at Tesla FSD, it's going to be able to resolve edge cases. Their approach does not resolve edge cases. And the big problem with Waymo and Cruise is that their approach does not resolve the cost per mile problem. Their approach is expensive on a dollars per mile basis. So, but why are they doing it? I mean, I think a lot of companies pursue a lot of angles that don't make sense, and they continue pursuing them after they stop making sense. Why is Toyota still pursuing hydrogen? Right? I mean,
Yeah.
why are companies still trying to innovate on gasoline engines when we can see the future is electric vehicles? A lot of companies make the smartphone. I mean, I don't know when the film camera companies realized the game was up and they stopped, but they probably went longer than they should have.
Yeah.
When you have dedicated capital and dedicated labor going on a path, it's hard to stop the train. And you have management that a lot of managers in these existing companies are staring at the wall saying, I can't see that. They just keep going forward because that's what they know.
Yeah, because Cruise in Austin and San Francisco, I'm like, let's say you even solve those cities. The probability you solve the entire world without having a fleet of vehicles and the data coming like a Tesla, it just seems like it's stupid to try. And I'm all for entrepreneurship and optimism and trying, but it doesn't seem like it makes sense, even from a financial perspective.
When I rode in Waymo in Arizona, there was a point where it should have made a left turn, and instead it made 3 right turns, which made the trip take longer.
Right.
Which is fine. Okay, so you're solving it, but are you really solving it? Right? Omar was driving in the Model 3 when we were in the Waymo, and the Tesla made the left turn. It didn't make the 3 right turns. FSD Beta made that left turn where the Waymo car wouldn't make the left turn. So, when you say solve it, are they really solving it? And are they really solving the edge cases, or are they glossing over the edge cases? If you create a sandbox, you create an environment. Well, let's have it drive only when there's no pedestrians. It's like Mercedes level 3 or level 4 self-driving now is like, well, on 0.3% of the roads, when you're following another car and you're not going more than 40 miles an hour, then you don't have to pay attention anymore. Well, that's not really solving a problem. And
right.
yeah, I don't think that Waymo and Cruise have a path to success, because in order to solve the edge cases, you need the high volume of data. Now, let's be clear. It's possible for someone to come up with a better AI model that can succeed on less data. I think that there are innovations that are coming to enable AI to learn on less data. I think humans learn on less data. So it's certainly possible that somebody will come up with it. But I don't think Waymo and Cruise have it. And I don't think you get there without trying a whole bunch of things that Tesla's able to try that others can't try because they don't have the fleet size to do it.
Do you think ICE vehicles will exist in the next 10 years?
I think that used ICE vehicles will exist for at least probably 20 years after 2030. I think that new production of ICE vehicles will end sometime around 2030, maybe before.
California did pass that legislation, right?
Legislation's irrelevant. If you're not making enough EVs to supply what people need, then you're going to still need to make ICE vehicles. And I don't think production of EVs is going to reach the level to where we don't need other new vehicles, because you're always going to have niche vehicles. There's going to be certain types of vehicles, let's say the Ford F-550, right? You might have Cybertruck that fulfills up to an F-350, and you have semi that serves larger trucking, but there's going to be a gap in places where there's no EVs to cover that particular area. So I think you're going to see EV production, ICE vehicle production continue until roughly 2030. And it could be 2028, it could be 2032. At some point that stops. But the typical ICE vehicle that was produced in, let's say, 2030 is probably still going to be on the road in 2040. So you're still going to have some ICE vehicles on the road for, at least 10 years past 2030 into 2040. But, the shift, you're going to see a massive shift into EV over the next 10 years.
Right.
It's already started.
I want to ask you a little bit about how you think Elon's doing right now. On that call, he obviously sounded a little tense. How would you psychoanalyze his personality and his mind state right now?
Sure. I don't psychoanalyze Elon. I think people place way too much weight on one comment here, one comment there. I heard them laughing about the game of pennies. I heard them people said that when they said they dug their own grave with Cybertruck, that this was a negative. And that was engineers laughing about how much work they had to do.
Right.
That was not, they're like, Elon's worried about Cybertruck. No, he's not worried about Cybertruck. He's just acknowledging that this is a difficult engineering challenge. The same thing happened, I don't know, it was a few quarters ago. They were talking about 4680. And Drew said, look, it's an engineering challenge, but it's not a physics challenge. We can fix this. And that's an example of like big news that came out in the earnings call that like the Gary Blacks of the world, just like, because Gary Black doesn't understand what a battery is. He literally, I don't know if he could put a battery in a flashlight. I wonder if the guy could put a battery in a flashlight. I don't think he knows what a cathode is. I don't think he knows what an anode is. I don't think he knows the difference between 4680 and 2170 and 1865 and lithium iron phosphate and nickel cadmium and nickel, cobalt aluminum.
Do you think he should know all these random things you're listing right now? Do you think it's important for him?
I think if you're going to claim to be an expert on Tesla, yes. Yes, I think you should understand these concepts. I think you should understand what Elon means by stacked log curves. I think you should understand what more data and more compute means. And I think the idea that I have a lot of followers and CNBC talks to me makes me an expert on Tesla is nonsense. But if you followed that bit about 4680, Drew said we increased production 40% quarter on quarter, and we reduced scrap 40% quarter on quarter. We're working on one line, and we produced our 20 millionth cell. On the second line, we've been producing the cyber cell, which is 10% more energy dense. We're now shifting line one over to the cyber cell, and we're going to produce cyber cell on all 4 existing lines. So that's like a 4x of, in a fairly short time frame, that's a 4x of a battery that's 10% more energy dense than the one they already have. And energy density is important. If you don't understand energy density, you don't understand Tesla either. And then we're investing to build out 4 more lines. So you're talking about by the end of 2024, probably you're going to have 8x production. Plus they're growing quarter on quarter, how efficient they are in producing the cells. Plus they're using the Fremont factory to make the next generation cell after Cybercell. And they've established that Fremont will be the place they develop the next cell after whatever cell they're producing. So they have a path to massive growth in battery production. And nobody asked about Giga Nevada. Like there was no question about Giga Nevada. Like everybody's freaking out about Giga Mexico. It's like they proposed an expansion of Giga Nevada, right? Which is where they're going to make semi in volume. It's where they're going to make a whole lot more battery cells in volume. Nobody even asked the question, what's the status of Giga Nevada? I don't know the answer. When is Giga Nevada's expansion going to happen? Where are they going to build the next generation vehicle in Shanghai? Do they have space already for the next generation vehicle in Shanghai? Are they planning to build a factory in Shanghai? Because you're not going to make that $20,000 vehicle. We know they're going to build it in Berlin. We know they've applied for permits for additional space to build 500,000 more vehicles a year. And we're pretty sure that's not going to be Model Y or Model 3, right? That's going to be the next generation vehicle. So you're going to build them in Texas. You're going to build them in Berlin. You're going to build them in Mexico. They have to build them in Shanghai. There's no question that they're going to build them somewhere in China. And they're probably going to build them in Shanghai because they've had so much success in Shanghai. So no one's talking about that. No one's talking about the other expansions that are going on. No one talked about Shanghai Mega Factory. There's all this growth all over the company, and people aren't seeing it because they're focused. Because the Gary Blacks and what's the guy's name, James Catt. There's these voices who are like, oh, Dark Elon. Oh, the Cybertruck. They're digging their own grave. Like,
do you think Elon has a good relationship with this new CFO that I don't know the name of?
Sure. Yeah.
But it sounded like he was cutting him off, kind of, on the earnings call.
He always cuts people off.
Okay. So
Do
you don't think there's
do
any
you think
drama between him and the
wait.
CFO?
Do you think the reaction to the new CFO was somewhat racist?
No, I don't think so.
I think the reaction to the new CFO
It's an
was
Indian
somewhat
CFO,
racist.
right?
What?
It's an Indian CFO.
Yeah, and he doesn't speak English as clearly as Zach Kirkhorn.
Oh, so that's your perspective.
You think I'm wrong? Don't you think
I have no idea. I just remembered he was Indian. That just hit my brain.
But they were saying he didn't speak clearly. He needs to. I heard somebody saying, "Oh, he needs to learn to speak up on the mic." Like, first of all, the call quality has always been crappy.
It's a microaggression. There was a little microaggression.
It's the guy's first time on an earnings call speaking. Everybody was trashing Zach when he was the new CFO. Oh, he's only 34 years old. He doesn't have enough experience. Blah blah. He's only worked inside Tesla and maybe some other stint somewhere else. They should have hired a better CFO. Now
I think the critique was Zach was able to better explain the numbers, whereas this guy, he seemed like he was getting cut off because he wouldn't really get through the numbers as well. I think that was the critique I heard.
I think that Elon overrode, talked over Zach in the past. He talks over Drew. He talks over Lars. Elon's Elon. I mean, the guy spoke. He delivered his remarks at the beginning. He wasn't interrupted by Elon at the beginning. But when they're doing the Q&A, Elon has a tendency to jump in and say something, and that's not new. And I don't know enough about this guy to have an opinion about him. All I can say is I think this previous wasn't his name Deepak, something like that, was the previous CFO before Zach. And when he left, it's like, oh no, we've lost his experienced CFO, and now we've got this rookie and he doesn't know what he's doing. And now everybody's like, oh no, Zach's gone. Like, this guy's been working at the company for a long time. He's been the chief accounting officer. He knows the company. He knows how things work. I think it's going to be fine. But I definitely heard criticisms of the way he spoke, that he didn't speak clearly. And to me, that was the classic, white person who claims he can't understand somebody with an accent. Like, learn to deal with freaking accents already.
Should Tesla start advertising aggressively instead of cutting prices, as per Ross Gerber's suggestion and Gary Black's suggestion?
First of all, that's a misleading choice. That assumes that if you advertise aggressively, you won't have to cut prices.
Correct.
Hyundai advertises aggressively and they just cut prices. Some car makers are choosing to produce less volume to avoid cutting prices, and some car makers are cutting prices as they increase volume. If you're increasing volume, you're going to have to lower prices. If the macroeconomic situation is that it costs more for people to own a car, then you have to cut prices to sell more cars.
But the talking point from Gary and Ross is that the margins are getting killed and revenues decreasing because of the cuts in prices, whereas you could solve that by putting on TikTok ads. And so my question from the OG,
did they say TikTok?
No, I'm just playing, right? But the point was advertising. I don't think they would mind TikTok. I think they would be like, oh, the younger generation's on TikTok, Snapchat ads, right? Like, I think this argument is also absurd because I'm like, I get advertising works. Advertising is a thing, but like, it's fucking ads. Like what? Like, really, people are going to love to buy a Tesla because of ads? Like, do you think advertising can solve the automotive margins getting cut?
So first of all, as far as I know, Gary Black has never paid for an advertisement. I've spent money on advertising. I ran a law firm. I had my own law firm that I built and I grew. And at my peak, I was probably spending something like $4,000 a month on advertising. And I ran for office, and I spent money on radio and TV.
I watched you debate, by the way, from 11 years ago.
Thank you. I spent money on radio and TV, and I spent money on Google ads, and I spent money on social media ads. And I have a pretty good understanding on a low level of what advertising is involved. And one of the things that you would want to look at is, what's your return on ad spend?
Correct.
If you are spending $1 million on ads, how much additional revenue do you expect that to generate?
Right.
So a really good return on ad spend would be $5 for every dollar you spend. Okay, well, if your margins are less than 20% and you increase revenue by $5 million, if you spend $1 million to increase revenue by $5 million, but your margins are less than 20%, then you spent more than your margin. So you're not helping margins. So you would have to have a return on ad spend that's better than 5-to-1 when you're having a 20% margin.
That's a good point.
And I thought of it like that. And Gary has this fantasy that you're going to spend $1 million on advertising. You'll be able to raise the price of each car by $1,000.
Right.
You're selling 2 million cars, so you're going to make $2 billion more in revenue because you spent $1 million in advertising or $50 million in advertising or $100 million in advertising. And it's like, if you spent an additional $100 million in advertising, then if you're lucky, you're going to generate an additional $500 million in revenue. Now, are you going to generate more revenue by selling more cars, or are you going to generate more revenue by increasing prices? If people can't afford the car, then advertising doesn't make them more able to afford the car. Does it? Are you going to? And there's so many questions with advertising. What's the message? Who's the audience?
Yeah.
Are you, like James Catt was saying, it's terrible that all these people are buying BMWs and Mercedes and Audis and Lexus. Well, Tesla's target isn't to displace BMW, Mercedes, Audi, and Lexus. That's low volume manufacturers. Their target, they've been very clear about their target. Their target is Toyota and Volkswagen, which are the high volume sellers, right? And Ford F-150, right? What are the vehicles they're targeting? They're targeting Corolla with the next generation vehicle. They targeted Camry with the Model 3. They targeted Highlander with the Model Y. I think the next generation vehicle is going to target both Corolla and RAV4. Elon specifically compared the Model Y to the RAV4.
Right.
So what are those vehicles? Well, those are the highest volume vehicles sold. And F1 Cybertruck goes after F-150, right? Well, after Model Y, what are the 3 highest volume vehicles on the market? Corolla, RAV4, and F-150. They're not targeting BMW 3 Series because that's a low volume manufacturer. They're trying to sell.
But do you think they should? Do you think those are more high net worth individuals that can buy an Audi? Do you think they should go after those people?
Well, is the goal to sell 20 million cars at reasonable margin, but making a fleet available for FSD when the FSD switch comes? Or is the goal to sell 2 million cars and outcompete Mercedes, BMW? The goal is to outcompete Toyota and Volkswagen, not to outcompete BMW, Mercedes, Audi, and Lexus.
So why is Gary Black and Ross Gerber continuing to say advertise, given the basic analysis you just did? If Ross Gerber was trying to run for the board, right? Like, this is a guy who I think is taken seriously in the circle, and he's pounding the drum. I don't watch him all the time, but when I get a chance to watch him, he says advertise. And like, your analysis seems pretty obvious. If you're going after Toyota, not Mercedes, you need to cut prices. Why do they keep campaigning to advertise?
So I would say fundamentally, they don't really understand the business. And I would say also their motives are suspect.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
I don't mean their motives are suspect like they're corrupt and they're being paid by big oil to trash Tesla. What I mean is that their motives are more like, I've been telling people this story and I can't admit I was wrong.
So they're narcissistic is what you're saying.
I don't think it's really hard to imagine Ross Gerber as narcissistic. Do you? Have you met him?
I mean, yeah.
Have you met him?
Well, no, but I heard him say Alex Karp is the devil and Palantir is Nazi Germany. I heard him say that on the podcast. So
I'm going to be really brutal when it comes to Ross. Do you think Ross has had some work done?
You mean like plastic surgery?
Yes. And hair.
One could assume that.
Why would you do that? Because you're narcissistic. Do I look like I've had work done?
No, it doesn't seem like you give a fuck. It seems like you're up on Tesla and you're happy with your investment.
By the way, bald is unattractive in Japan.
Wait, bald is unattractive in Japan? They don't like bald?
Yeah.
Well,
bald is not considered attractive in Japan. As a foreigner, I can get away with it, but in general, Japanese men do not go bald.
So you think Ross is a narcissist and he has this story around Tesla and Gary, and they just want to be right, which is why he even tried to run for the board, and that's why they keep going for this ad. Because what you described 5-to-1, like I used to do Facebook ads in the past, I understand ROAS as well, not at a super deep level, but yeah, it makes sense. If you have a 20% margin, it's a big ask. And then you got to talk about the creative. Is the ad even good? Is it on TV? Is it on social? There's so many complexities and nuances to this. It seems like they have an agenda trying to get this advertising message out there.
Yeah, I mean, my thing, if I was talking to Gary, like,
I'm here.
Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. No camera, just that. You're good.
So I don't even see Ross anymore. I see Gary from time. I'm not sure why I don't see Ross anymore, but I never see Ross anymore. I don't know if I muted him or what happened, but I don't see him anymore. And I see Gary's posts occasionally, and I respond to Gary's posts. But I think, fundamentally, that's the question I would ask him. Okay, what audience would you target? How would you target them? What would your message? This is like the classic thing is people will say, well, they should do an educational advertising campaign. All right, I'm going to turn this on you for a second. Give me an example of an educational advertising campaign that was effective for any product or service anywhere in advertising history.
Okay, there was one when I was like 4 years old and I watched TV. You know those smokers? They would put like the You know, they would show their like throats ripped apart, and they would put like a
Yes.
tube, and they would be talking as a robot. I think maybe that stuck in my mind when I was little, like, oh, I shouldn't smoke. But
Okay.
you know,
So
outside of that,
that was a fairly simple bit of education, right? It was like
correct.
smoking is bad for your lungs, and it's pretty straightforward how to explain that. How many different things do they want to educate people on with Tesla? You've
Yeah.
got well, the prices are lower than you think. You've got low total cost of ownership. You've got safety. You've got efficiency. You've got software is really cool. You've got crash worthiness. You've got, there's this is how you do one pedal driving, because you need to educate people on one pedal
That was a
driving.
big thing for me. I was very confused when I saw that the first time I drove it.
So
Yeah.
there's easily 10 topics, if you dive into it, these guys would claim they want to educate consumers on. All right, which consumers do you want to communicate? Do you want to communicate to BMW, Mercedes, Audi, and Lexus buyers that Teslas are cheaper? Is that a message that resonates with people who buy BMW,
No.
Mercedes?
No.
Like, is that like, you want to communicate to them, hey, our cars are cheaper than your cars? Is that how you want to go into the country club? Hey, my Tesla's cheaper than your Mercedes. Like, that's not a selling point in the country club, right?
Warren, let me ask you a question. Do you think Ross and Gary want mainstream media to stop shitting on Tesla? And the reason they don't shit on the other car manufacturers is because of a lot of advertising dollars from those car companies. Do you think there's some argument around, oh, we can get CNBC to be on our side if Tesla just pays CNBC to advertise in the commercial breaks? Do you think there's a theory there?
It's possible that they think that, and then they really don't understand Elon. And they also don't understand that the reach, like, because they watch CNBC and because CNBC puts them on, they think CNBC matters.
Right.
And the reality is that the audience isn't on cable TV anymore. The audience isn't watching television anymore. The audience is watching YouTube, and they're watching X, and they're watching TikTok, and they're not on the mainstream media anymore. That's not their target. I could see the argument for doing brand, like, if they come up with a new generation of S and X, which I think they should do. I think that at some point in the next 2 or 3 years, we're going to see a new version of Model X in particular. I think Model X could sell 5x its volume if they manufactured it more like the Model Y, but 6 inches longer and 2 inches wider than the Model Y, to have a legit third row without the Falcon Wing doors. I think if they advertised that car in golf tournaments, and you said, hey, it's under $80,000, do you qualify for the tax credit? And, you talk about the tax credit you get for, buying a large vehicle, more than this gross vehicle weight rating, you get this special tax credit or whatever, special tax accounting. If you advertise that on golf tournaments, and you talked about the features of the car to people who watch golf tournaments, those are the people who are buying Mercedes, BMW, and Lexus. But
Right.
But Model X is like I said about Cybertruck. Model X is not the future of the company. The future of the company is the next generation vehicle, and the future of the company is not really selling cars; it's selling rides. It's Tesla building a Robotaxi network and selling rides instead of selling cars.
And if they are going after Toyota and Honda Civics and Camrys and all that stuff, you don't need to you don't need to advertise. If that's 20,000, even if it's 25,000, of course I would pick a Tesla over Toyota, right? Like, that's just obvious. So yeah, it's a really, again, I'm not super into the Tesla community. I obviously studied the company. I try to understand. I'm not as big as you, but these are the guys that I hear talking about advertising like it's a religion. I just don't get it.
If you want, I'll give you my criticism of Tesla.
Okay.
So I think I have a feeling they're on top of this more than I give them credit for. I just haven't seen it yet. But I'm in Japan, and Tesla sells 500 cars a month in Japan. They sell 50,000 cars a month in China. They sell 500 cars a month in Japan. They sell basically no cars in India. I think they sell 0 cars in India. So India and Japan are battling for third largest car market in the world. I think Japan is the third largest market by value, and India might now be the third largest market by unit volume. But if you look at the Japanese market, half the cars are ultra small. They're called K cars in Japan, light cars. The maximum engine size for internal combustion engine is 660 cc's. And there's a similar market in India of like the Tata Nano class of vehicle, even though the Nano itself wasn't successful. The Maruti Suzuki small, very small 4-passenger vehicle. I think the next generation vehicle is going to be more on the scale of the Corolla and the RAV4. And I think for Tesla to succeed in the future, they have to break into the Indian market to get to 20 million vehicles. They have to succeed in India. They have to succeed in Japan. And in order to do that, they're going to need a vehicle that's even smaller than what I think they're doing with the next generation vehicle.
Right.
If it's selling cars, and even if it's selling rides, I think the average consumer in India won't be able to afford 50 cents a mile in a Tesla Robotaxi. And you're going to need to drive that price down to 25 cents a mile or 20 cents a mile. And I don't know if you know, I have a startup that I'm working on to try to drive that price down to 5 cents a mile, right? So that the Indian who's living on $4,000 a year US can occasionally afford a ride. And the Indian who's living on the software engineer in India who's living on $15,000 a year can afford, rides.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that's a step that Tesla needs to do better in India. Like, no one's talking about that. Tesla is not doing well in Japan, and they're not doing anything in India. And by the way, Toyota is pulling out of India. Toyota announced, the Toyota announced that because of the Indian policies, like I guess the taxes for owning a vehicle, Toyota. There's just an article. If you look at Toyota, if you do a new Google News search for Toyota India, they're at least threatening to pull out of India because the government policies are making it harder and harder to sell cars in India. Maruti Suzuki's there. Like, I don't think Maruti Suzuki's leaving. Those who don't know, Maruti Suzuki is a joint venture between an Indian company and Suzuki,
right?
And they particularly make smaller vehicles. I think Hyundai's still there, and Hyundai I think has some sort of joint venture with somebody, and they're doing okay. But Toyota is basically giving up on India. India is a hard market to crack. And I don't know what the solution is going to be for Tesla to crack India. But if you want to get to 20 million, you probably need to sell vehicles in India. You need to sell vehicles in Japan in much higher volume than 500 units a year in Japan. So I think the next generation vehicle will go a long way to solving Japan. But I think there's other issues. And I did see that they're advertising in the Haneda Airport in Tokyo. They have some big display. So I think they're making some effort somewhere. And I'll tell you that I'm in Nagoya, which is sort of the center of the Japanese car industry. And I talk to people and I read occasional Japanese articles, and they're terrified of Tesla.
Because they think it's going to put them out of business.
They see the train coming.
Yeah.
They see it. Not everybody sees it, but there's a lot of people in Japan who see, like, we're about to get our asses kicked. They know they're getting their asses kicked in America. They know they're getting their asses kicked in China. They know they're getting their asses kicked in Europe. And it's not here in Japan yet, but it's probably coming to Japan too. And even if it doesn't come to Japan, if they lose all their other markets, can they continue to survive just selling cars in Japan?
What are your current thoughts of Cathie Wood as a fund manager, as someone who has thoughts on Tesla, her team's thesis? Do you think they're on the right trajectory of understanding the company?
I definitely think they have a better long-term understanding of I have little quibbles here and there with how they model things, but I definitely think, what's her name? Tasha Keeney.
Yep.
Brett, I can't remember Brett's
Brett
last
Wonton.
name.
No,
Brett Winton. Brett Winton.
Yeah, I call him Wonton.
There's a couple others there. I definitely think they have a better overall conception of Tesla. Like I would quibble with them on the finer points, but I think they definitely, like, I don't like their Monte Carlo model. I don't think that's particularly helpful, but I'm not saying they're wrong. It's just like that's an approach I don't like. I think I read they have like a white paper every year, and they have I literally get an email from them like more than once a week, and I read less than half of them. But I think they have a really good outlook on the future in general, looking at a variety of areas where they see revolutionary change happening. And I think they're probably about as reliable a place to go to read, not necessarily for a source for truth, but for a source for giving you something to think about.
Why is the institutional investor base not as high as it's 60% retail, I think still? You got companies like Robinhood have 80%.
I think it's 40% retail and 15% Elon is the ownership of the company.
So I guess the question is, why aren't there 70-80% of institutions investing in Tesla? Given a Cathie proved she 30x'd on it, right? And I know they don't like her other picks, but she was right on that one. Why don't you think their companies get in?
I think the answer is because Elon's not selling, and neither am I. Jason DeBolt isn't selling. I'm not selling. Dave Lee's not selling. Bruce Burnworth isn't selling. Larry Goldberg isn't selling. Brad Ferguson's not selling. There's a lot of retail investors who aren't selling. And institutional investors, again, it's a highly volatile stock. And institutional investors tend to avoid highly volatile stocks. And I would really put it at, like, there was this comment earlier from this guy, he thinks it's a low probability of of FSD working in 2030. So 2013, this is like my greatest success. One of my greatest successes, one of my greatest mistakes in investing was in 2013. I thought I understood Amazon well enough, and I bought some Amazon stock, and it went up like 13x. So it was one of my best investments because it went up 13x. It was one of my worst investing decisions because I didn't buy more.
Yeah.
Right. So most of institutional investors did not see Amazon in 2013. Why? It was highly volatile. Their profits were up and down. They weren't really a profitable company. But I was an Amazon Prime customer, and I noticed I was checking Amazon's website every day to see what deals there were. And I thought, okay, I'm an early adopter. More people are going to do this. And that's a partial explanation for why Amazon succeeded. I didn't see Amazon Web Services blowing up.
Right.
But I saw that the way they were running their website and the way they were developing shopping as a business was truly innovative. And I see what Tesla is doing with cars as truly innovative. And I think that it's a challenge to look out there and find out who's truly innovating. So there's fans of Palantir and they say, oh, Palantir is doing this amazing thing. And like, it doesn't matter how many Palantir investors I talk to or how many Palantir presentations I watch. I just watched one with Alex Karp talking about, I think he was in Spain.
Mm-hmm.
And like I watched like 30 minutes of his talk. I was like, I still don't know what they do. Right?
Yeah,
like,
fair.
Fair. Tesla does a presentation and okay, this is how they're making cars. They've got this new way of making cars. Okay, this is how they're developing FSD. Like, all right, Palantir might be brilliant, but I don't see the growth story and I don't really understand the business. I think NVIDIA is brilliant. I think they're priced very high, and I think probably they are going to sustain the growth. But Dojo is coming, and I don't think NVIDIA's moat in AI chips is necessarily as big as all the moats that Tesla has.
How much, Warren? Do you have another 20 minutes? Can we go for another?
Sure, I got as much time as you need.
Okay, so I really need to piss, and I've been waiting for an hour and 20 minutes. I'm going to ask a question. I will be back in 2 minutes. You can start talking, and I just have to piss, but I don't want to end this.
What you got to do?
Is Dojo going to eat NVIDIA's lunch? That's the question. I'll be right back.
Okay, sure. So for those who aren't familiar with Project Dojo, Tesla has a particular need for AI to handle video streams. They've got 400,000 cars generating video. Actually, they really have 4 million cars or 5 million cars that are generating video. And they use that video to train the computers how to drive better. And they basically look at, let's identify who the best drivers are, basically the equivalent of the 5-star Uber drivers. And they identify a situation which the cars aren't handling well. And they go back and they get a whole bunch of clips from the best drivers to see how they handled that kind of situation. So in order to process that volume of video data and to do the kind of training you need really, really specialized hardware. NVIDIA's hardware is actually pretty good. NVIDIA A100, and now they just bought a new cluster of NVIDIA H100 chips, chipsets or whatever, and they're crunching data using that. But NVIDIA just literally can't supply them with enough chips to be able to do the data crunching they need to do. So Tesla started its own project to make its own AI chips and its own AI hardware, which is known as Project Dojo. And in a post, I think on X, Tesla's AI team, whatever, posted a graph showing where they are now and where they expect their compute to be in the end of 2025. So their compute right now is around, I'll give it the number, I think it's like 5,000. They have 15,000. At the time, they had 15,000 A100 GPUs. And they expect by the end of 2025, or a little before the end of 25, maybe it was the end of 2024. I think it's towards the end of 2024, they're going to have the equivalent of 300,000 A100 GPUs. Now, they just added 10,000 H100 GPUs, which are like 2 or 3 times as fast as an A100 GPU for this purpose. But I'm expecting that the number of the Dojo contribution to Tesla's compute is going to 5 or 10x. So then that's the answer for, in the short term, what Tesla is doing is every Dojo computer they build is going to be working on Tesla. And I think they announced or hinted that they're building a cluster of Project Dojo computers in Texas. They already have a cluster in California. So is the
impact to Dojo FSD works, right? That's the impact to it. It's not like they're selling compute to like Amazon or anything.
So it's not just getting FSD to work. It's like once you get it to work, you want it to work better. You want it to work. If it's, let's say, twice as safe as a human driver, you want it to be 5 times as safe as a human driver. You want it to be 10 times as safe as a human driver. You want it to be 100. You want to go from 1 million car accident deaths a year to 0, right? And
Right.
at first you're going to get to 500,000, and then you're going to get to 250,000, and then you're going to get to 100,000. You're still going to want to get fewer car deaths. You're still going to want AI to drive more efficiently. There's all these gains. You're still going to want to improve FSD after you achieve better than human.
Right.
And it's really for bot. Optimus is going to have a lot more environments that it's going to operate in. It's going to have a lot more tasks that it's going to do. Like the car doesn't manipulate objects. The bot is going to pick up objects and do something with them. It's going to press buttons. It's going to, screw in screws. So there's a lot of different things. So the training for bot is going to be the computing needs for training bot are probably 100x the training needs of training the cars. So I think in the short to medium term, Dojo's use will be all Tesla and it won't displace NVIDIA. I think there's a point in the future, maybe 5 years from now, where we're on the next generation of Dojo or the next generation of Dojo after that. And they may offer AI training as a service, just like people are offering cloud services now.
Right.
And does that end up competing with NVIDIA? And my gut hunch is the demand for AI training is so large, just like the demand for robotaxis is so large that there's room for other people to sell robotaxis or offer robotaxis, and Tesla can still deliver 20 million a year. And we need to replace 2 billion vehicles, right? So 20 million a year doesn't make much of a dent in 2 billion vehicles.
So did you agree with Adam Jonas's whole thesis? Did that make sense to you?
I didn't see what Adam Jonas said about this.
I mean, wasn't the whole 550 price target kind of based on Dojo being pivotal to Tesla?
I didn't read what Jonas said. I'm just saying that I think Dojo is, in the short to medium term, it helps Tesla achieve the goals of making FSD work and making Optimus work, and that is an ongoing project, getting them better. Training Optimus to do more things, training FSD to drive better. There will be other robots. They've already hinted pretty clearly that they have other robots in mind beyond Optimus. I personally think they need a roof installation robot so that they can install solar roof tiles and solar panels. I think they're going to need.
I actually want to talk about that next. Do you know the company Enphase and Solar Edge?
I know of it. I don't know much about it, but I know of it. Yeah.
Is Tesla coming for the microinverter companies' lunches as well? Because Tesla Solar is obvious if you have a car, I'd imagine.
I think that the market for solar is so large that there's room for others, and I don't think it's about outcompeting Enphase. It's about getting to the point where you can deliver solar to people at a cost that they can afford. They can afford, and like the real challenge in solar right now is with interest rates high, the cost of financing the solar installation, and most solar installations is financed. The cost of installing is so high because of the financing cost that it doesn't the return on investment doesn't happen fast enough to justify the investment for a lot of people. So if you can further drive down the price of solar, if you can, in particular in America, drive down the price of installing solar with bots, like we talked about the bots in the McDonald's or the Burger King, right? Well, What if you had a roofing project and you've got 10 guys on the roof and you were able to get it down to 2 guys on the roof and 10 bots? And then, if a guy falls off the roof, it's a major problem. If a bot falls off the roof, okay, we just get another bot. Right? You're not as worried that the bot got injured. It doesn't feel pain. It may be fixable. It may not be fixable, but you didn't lose a human. You didn't have to put a human, make a human disabled for the rest of their lives. So the potential for bots to lower the cost of roof installs, and maybe you have, given the volume of roofs that they want to install, maybe a specialized bot for roof installation would make sense. Like a spider bot might be better at climbing the walls and operating on the roof and have a lower center of gravity. I think there's a lot of potential for more bots, but you have to drive down the cost of solar. I don't think it's the cost of the solar cells or the solar panels. It's the cost of install.
Right.
There's an account on Twitter, on X, Tesla and Doge, and he just described he had like a 16 kilowatt system installed on his home in Pakistan for like $7,500, something like that. Like his cost of installation, I think it worked out to like $1 a watt, right? Which is what Tesla was going for and they weren't able to achieve. If you can get I think that included batteries, by the way. So he did really well. And it's because labor costs are so high in America, labor costs are so high in Europe, labor costs are so high in a lot of countries that if you can come up with a way of solving that labor problem and getting over the ridiculous permitting problems and other issues, then you can really deploy your solar in volume. And if you get to a regulatory environment and a labor environment where you can deliver solar in high volume, there's more than enough room for other companies to install solar. It's just a question of, can you deliver solar to the customers at a price that's low enough that they're willing to buy it? And I don't know what Enphase's strategy is for lowering cost. But
Right.
Tesla is laser focused on, we've got to get the cost down, we got to get the cost down, we got to get the cost down. If we get the cost down low enough, people can afford it.
Okay, I want to talk about X. There's $13 billion of debt on this company, and if it doesn't work, Elon's gonna have to sell a lot of Tesla stock or maybe SpaceX stock to finance it. Do you think the future of X is thriving? Do you think it's going to do well? They announced some premium tiers they're working on. As a Tesla shareholder, I'm assuming you think about the success of this company as well.
I think about X because I'm on X all the time. And I'm not worried about the future. I don't really worry if Elon sells stock. I don't think he's selling SpaceX stock, by the way. He believes he needs to control SpaceX because you're not getting to Mars as a public company.
Yeah.
You're not getting to Mars unless you have.
Oh, really? So you don't even think he wants to take it public necessarily?
He will take Starlink public.
Right.
He will IPO Starlink as an offshoot, and that will generate more revenue for space. And SpaceX will continue to own a large share of Starlink, and that will generate revenue for SpaceX that will fund operations. But he's not willing to lose control of SpaceX because that's too important of a mission. So as far as X goes, they say that they're in the ballpark of cash flow positive now or soon. So I'm less worried about that. I think that's not including the interest payments they have to make.
Correct. Yeah.
But I think if they're able to demonstrate to investors, hey, we're cash flow positive, they can bring in more investment into X and be able to cover those problems. But I don't spend a lot of time worrying about. I'm confident that Elon did way better than anybody, than all these critics for like, oh, Twitter's going to fail, Twitter's going to shut down, you can't fire 85% of the staff and keep the thing running. Well, they kept the thing running. They've been making lots of improvements.
Are you enjoying your time on the platform more than you were before, Elon?
Yes. Yeah, I think for me, one of the biggest things is, like, I'm on YouTube and I have to be careful what I say on YouTube because I'm going to get censored. And I have a whole separate channel called The Daily Lie that I talk about politics on because I know I can't talk about politics on YouTube. I do want to quickly mention, by the way, I published a novel, Shelby Hits the Fan. It's on Amazon. Just Google Shelby Hits the Fan. Or search for Shelby Hits the Fan.
I'll put the link in the chat. That's amazing.
Check that out. It's got 1 review so far, 5 stars.
And this is a fiction book?
It wasn't me. I didn't write the review. Yeah, it's a novel. But and I had the assistance of ChatGPT and others. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I had the assistance of ChatGPT and Claude from Anthropic and Grammarly to do a better job of writing the book. And I'm going to write a few more books. Or I'm planning on writing a few more books as well.
I didn't know you had a creative writer side to you. I thought you were just the YouTube side. I like it.
Well, YouTube is a little bit creative. I published a book. Sorry. 10 years ago, I published this book, which is nonfiction. That's Fair DUI, How to Stay Safe and Sane in a World Gone Mad, MADD. That's a nonfiction book based on my work as a criminal defense lawyer. So that one just poured out when I wrote that one. This one, writing fiction's harder.
A little harder.
And I have a nonfiction book I'm going to write next. But anyway, I just, as far as X goes, yes, I'm enjoying my time on the platform more. I spend too much time on X. I am making money on X. I made, I think, $280 in the last 2-week payment. I'm probably making in the ballpark of $500 or $600 a month because the previous 2 weeks was not as high, and I have subscribers. I'm probably making somewhere around $500 or $600 a month on X. And there are people who are like constantly talking about, how do I get more reach on X? How do I make more money on X? I'm not worried about that. I'm having fun on the platform, and if I make money, great. I'm not saying I never think about, how do I make this go viral, or how do I do a post occasionally that will do better. But which post am I going to pin on my profile, or what am I going to add to my highlights tab? But mainly, I just talk about the stuff I want to talk about, and if it works, it works.
Do you think his commitment to free speech on X will be one of the broader legacies that Elon leaves outside of Tesla and SpaceX? Because personally, I actually do. I love the fact that there's no censorship. There's no FBI, colluding with Twitter on what should be or not. Like, it really, and given this whole Israel-Hamas situation, there's everything. I get to see everything and then make a decision. Whether I like it or not, there's a lot of raw shit. And sometimes you need to see that to have an opinion. It's not censored. And I could only imagine if Jack Dorsey was CEO, it wouldn't be the case.
Yeah, I feel a lot freer on the platform. It matters to me and personally at this moment. I don't have a sense for, like, if we didn't have free speech on X, would humanity's future be in jeopardy by not having free speech? And I think his argument is, without free speech, humanity's future is in jeopardy. And I struggle with that because I think China is growing without having free speech. I think I see a lot of economic growth without free speech. I see a lot of innovation in China without free speech. So I'm not sure how critical that is, but I appreciate it. I mean, I think the legacy of establishing a self-sustaining colony on Mars is a pretty big one. I think, like, no one sees the boring. I'm like there's like 2 or 3 other people in the world who get the Boring Company like I do. The potential for a Boring Company to literally change everything on Earth is going to be off the charts. Neuralink is going to be off the charts. I mean, curing brain disease and enabling humans, like, Neuralink is going to be like the iPhone to the 10th power.
All right, gut feeling. Does Elon actually colonize Mars?
SpaceX will build a self-sustaining colony on Mars. And this is one of those things where, see, people think it's all Elon. Same thing with Tesla. They think it's all Elon. Like, if you go to a Tesla factory and you talk to Tesla employees, if you follow people involved with SpaceX, I've been to Starbase. I've talked to SpaceX, at least one SpaceX employee, a SpaceX contractor. It's not that Elon is saying, let's go to Mars, and everybody's like, oh, okay, Elon, let's go. It's like, they want to go to Mars too. He has built a culture where everyone has bought into, we're going to Mars. He has built a culture at Tesla. We're going to accelerate the transition to sustainable energy, and these are the things we're going to do. And along the way, we're going to build some really cool stuff and have some fun, right? We're going to cure brain disease at Neuralink. He is hiring people who buy into the mission. And if Elon's gone, the team still buys into the mission. The team is still, you have to build the culture of innovation and the culture of pursuing that mission. And he's really built that culture at SpaceX. He's really built that culture at Tesla. I believe he's built that culture at Neuralink. And I think he's built that culture at Boring Company. Boring Company is headed by Steve Davis, who's one of the SpaceX engineers who got the Falcon 9 and Falcon 1 and Falcon 9 going.
They're the ones trying to do the tunnels, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that tunnel thing, people have no idea how much of a game changer that's going to be. That is like a large share of the traffic that is currently traveling on roads, emitting pollution and making a lot of noise and killing pedestrians, is going to go underground where it makes no noise that can be heard above ground. It's not going to be emitting pollution, and it's not going to be killing pedestrians. And you're going to see 50+% of global transportation traffic go underground in the next 20 years. And you're going to see Boring Company tunnels replacing all at some point, they're going to figure out a way to do boring tunnels through the Bering Strait to connect Asia to North America, which connects Asia and Europe, all of Asia and Europe, to all of North America and South America. And you eliminate all trans-Pacific cargo shipping and all trans-Pacific air travel. And you will eventually eliminate all transatlantic cargo shipping and all transatlantic air travel. And you're just going to, like, totally change the game of life on Earth when you do that.
Let's touch on this subject, and then I have one more question. Auto worker strikes. What are your thoughts on the implications of that for Tesla?
So I think the question is infiltrating Tesla. So auto worker strikes are damaging GM and Ford and Stellantis. I don't think that GM and Ford and Stellantis were posing a threat to Tesla anyway. So I don't think that's particularly important. As far as UAW infiltrating Tesla, they've been trying in California for years and they haven't succeeded. They're not going to make any progress in Texas. And then Shanghai is different, and Berlin, I think there's going to be unionization in Berlin at some point. I don't think that's necessarily a big deal.
Is that because it's Europe?
Well, I think they're what's it called? There's some particular union that's working on Berlin, and I just think European culture is probably more likely to let that happen. The European system. But I don't know enough about Europe to say. I just think it's likely it'll happen. But Berlin is a small factory in the grand scheme of things for Tesla. And if the thing is that when when you do decide to raise Tesla's costs having unionization in a Tesla factory is going to raise Tesla's cost of manufacturing that location. You're basically saying to Tesla, don't build any more factories here.
Right.
Build your factories in places where you won't face these problems. This is the problem in India. Like India is basically screaming at Tesla, don't build here. We don't want you here. We're not making an environment that's friendly for Tesla to build factories. I think Japan actually would be friendly to a Tesla factory, but that's a whole long conversation. But, you want to find a place where you can build your factories where you can produce at low cost and high volume and have, workers who want to work. Like in Berlin, they're not doing a night shift because it's not economic to do it. Right. Well, that's not a great thing. Like Shanghai doesn't have that problem. Like if you can produce in Shanghai, you just produce more in Shanghai. Why would you bother producing in Berlin? Why would you? I don't know whether Mexico is really going to make sense. Like Japan, people like the idea of the United Auto Workers saying we want, like when I talk to Japanese people who work for companies, like, yeah, the United Auto Workers wants to reduce their workload from 40 hours a week to 32 hours a week. And the Japanese people are like, they want what? Like that's not even, they can't even process only working 40 hours a week.
Yeah.
Right?
It's not the same 996 culture there as China, right? Or it's
Japan,
more than 40 hours. Yeah.
Japanese workers work long, hard hours.
Yeah.
Now, are they efficient in their use of their hours? Are there things that they do that are culturally, bonding, but maybe not great for, long-term success? There's some questions about that. But I will say, having lived in America and now living in Japan, work ethic is better in Japan. They're smart, they're hardworking. I don't know if they're as innovative as Americans, but I think that the lack of innovation is really due to some cultural constraints. I think the people are just as innovative. So
in your response to like the German or foreign electric vehicle, the Mercedes EV that's super luxurious, et cetera, in terms of competition to Tesla, is that's not competition, even if they have a really good luxurious EV, because Tesla's going after the average consumer.
Yeah, well, look, first of all, there's room for other EVs. Tesla can't make enough. If Tesla makes 20 million a year in a world with 2 billion vehicles, and the vehicles only last 10 years, like you're going to need other people to make another 20 to 50 million EVs a year. You don't need to beat everyone. You need other people to make EVs. Tesla's not going to be that big. And then, building $100,000 EVs for luxury car buyers is not a segment that Tesla needs. That's not the segment that they're going for long term. That's the segment they were in at the start, right? Model S buyers, Model X buyers, Roadster. But they always said they were going to move mass market, and they're moving mass market. They're doing exactly what Elon said 5-10 years ago. Start with a expensive EV that we can build and make profitably at a small volume, then go to a somewhat less expensive EV we can build in a higher volume, then go to a less expensive EV we can build in a higher volume, and they're following their path. And as you go down that path, the earlier vehicles that were expensive become less and less important. I personally, if Tesla announced tomorrow we're shutting down Model S and X production, would anyone skip a beat?
No. No, that's fair. Okay, my last question for you. You can take however much time you want on this one. You read the book or you heard the book? Did you read it or you listened to it? Audio.
Walter Isaac's biography?
Yeah.
I read it in print. Where is it? Oh, I think I lent it to somebody. I read it in print, cover to cover, in 2 days.
2 days. Wow. Okay. What were your, top 3, top 5, whatever, just whatever rant you have? What was your real take? Because what was your takeaway is the question. I heard the Elon demon mode. That's like the big thing I got, where he turns into an animal. But to me, that's a sign of greatness. I'm an entrepreneur. You're an entrepreneur. We want to tap into that, some type of existential mode, spiritual mode that gets us to the next level. What was your takeaway reading that book?
So first of all, my larger perception of the book was, if you are an Elon junkie like I am, the first half of the book was not a lot of new information. The early days of SpaceX, for example, were covered really, really well in the book Liftoff by Eric Berger. And I read that book twice, and I listened to the audio version of that book once already. And I've been to Starbase, and I've talked to people at Starbase, and I followed SpaceX from fairly early on. I followed Tesla fairly early on. I read the previous biography of Elon. I've read I've seen like I pretty much watch anytime he speaks anywhere publicly. I've watched and listened and probably listened 5 times and dissected it and made a video about it. So
Mm,
the first half of the book was not a lot of new information. But if you're not a junkie like me, then there's a lot of really good stuff in there. And
right.
then the second half of the book, there was a lot of new information about Twitter/X. I think he missed the Boring Company. I actually asked Walter Isaacson about the Boring Company in a space, and I think it's pretty clear that he didn't spend any significant time in Boring Company, and he doesn't see the future of Boring Company the way. I don't know if you saw. I posted on X about the Boring Company, like my projection for where Boring Company could be in 10 plus years. And Elon responded and said, what I said was technologically possible. The holdup is like permitting.
Mm, I didn't see
That
that.
government gets in the way. So like, literally like the Bering Strait idea, like he backed that technologically feasible. It's just getting governments to go along with the things that they want to do. Um, so Demon Mode was cool. I think as an entrepreneur, I know I can't be Elon.
Right.
I'm trying to build a startup to build a small electric vehicle. Like I described how they're making the next generation vehicle, and that's smaller and like Corolla sized, maybe we think. We don't know, but it's ballpark we're guessing it's Corolla sized. Corolla RAV4 sized. And I think they need to build a smaller vehicle to capture like the Indian, to compete effectively in the large portion of the Indian market and half the Japanese market. I think there's room for an even smaller single passenger vehicle. So I have my own idea of what I want to do is to build prototypes of a single passenger electric vehicle. Trying to do it in Japan. If I can't get a visa here, I'm going to go to India and try to do it in India. As a hobby, not as a business, just to be clear, if the Indians are watching. If it looks like it's going to be a business, then I'll get a business visa. But I know I can't be Elon. I'm not going to be sleeping on a factory floor. Right. I shouldn't say that. I think it's possible I will be sleeping on a factory floor, but like right now, like I don't have Elon's capital. I see myself as more as like an Elon in the Zip2 stage when he was starting up a company with his brother, sleeping in the office and eating an In-N-Out burger. Like that's what I'm trying to get to. I'm not trying to get to Elon running PayPal with millions of dollars in investments. That's 2-3 years from now. But you're not going to be Elon. But you can learn lessons from Elon. And I think some of the big lessons to learn from Elon are, one of my favorite quotes from Elon was at a Starship presentation. He said, the best part is no part. The best process is no process. It weighs nothing, costs nothing, whatever. So when I'm looking at building my vehicle, it's like, well, how do we make this thing simpler? No, how do we make it simpler than that? How do we, how can we remove that? How can we start, not start putting that part in? Right? Before you start thinking about removing parts, like what parts do we not need in the first place? How do we start from the beginning of making this thing as simple as possible? And I think if you have that principle in mind, sort of a first principles, I want to deliver a person from point A to point B as inexpensively as possible. What's the least expensive way to do that? And what's a way we can build something that can be mass manufactured at scale? Right? So, and prototypes, he says prototypes are easy and manufacturing is hard. I can't even build prototypes yet. I'm struggling to get prototypes built. People have no idea. That's, I think, a second lesson that's sort of from the book, but really from like having run, my own law firm and run a couple other businesses. And like, people have no idea how hard it is to run a business.
Yeah.
I mean, you're basically chewing broken glass all day
100%.
long.
All day.
And I'm not going to be, Elon has chewed more glass than anyone ever in the world. He has, done, just to run a simple small business with like 50 employees is something I've never managed to do.
Yeah.
Right. I think I've had 5 employees at my peak. To actually have staff and build something and grow something, and you have to deal with government regulatory authorities in this way, and you have to do foreign trade. There's so many things that go into what they do at Tesla that are so hard. And the fact that this guy knows like every aspect of the business cold. Like if you ask Mary Barra, like what kind of battery chemistry are you using in the bolts, or where are you getting your cathode from? Where are you getting your anode from? Like Elon knows all that stuff. He really dives deep. And I am hoping that on, my one little project, which is much smaller and should be much easier than anything that Tesla does or anything that SpaceX does. I am hoping and planning that I'm going to dive deep and I'm going to understand this thing that we're trying to build better than as well as anyone, right? So I think you need to identify a project that you think you can succeed at that other people think you can't.
Well,
right?
why do other people need to think you can't?
Because then if you're doing something that's too easy, you're not doing something that's hard enough. You've got to do something that's hard, right? You've got to identify something that if people think it's easy, then other people could do it.
Other people would do it, yeah.
Right. And if they think it's easy for you to do it, then you're not challenging yourself enough.
Right.
So here I am, a retired lawyer, an active YouTuber who has no business at all starting up an engineering company, but like I see it. I have a vision, and I have some things other people don't have. I have time and I have money, right? I have enough money that I can burn $100,000 over the next couple of years on a stupid idea, and maybe it ends up turning out to be not such a bad idea, right?
What is the motivation for doing the idea?
Is
it broader climate change stuff? Is it?
Sure. So Tesla's mission is to accelerate the transition to sustainable energy and sustainable transportation, and the path that they're on will do that for the rich world and for rich people in middle income countries, developing countries. But it will not reach, the path that they're on will not reach middle class people in countries like India and working class people in developing countries. The price of the ride will still be too high for billions of people. So I want to extend the transition to sustainable energy and transportation to people who have less.
Right.
Because we're not going to eliminate fossil fuels unless we get those people off fossil fuels, and we're not going to make their lives better. Like, if you can make life better for 1 billion people, that's a pretty good goal.
Yeah.
And I see 1 billion people out there who are not going to be reached by Tesla's innovations anytime soon. And I think I can reach down and build something. I think I can work on building something that will help them. And it might even work in Japan. Like, it might even make life better in Japan as well. I don't think Americans will ride in my car. My car's too small. Americans want to be in a big vehicle. I don't think Japanese are going to have a problem riding a small vehicle.
So your day-to-day living in Japan is kind of kinking with this idea, seeing how you can tinkering with it every day.
Well, yeah, I mean, I definitely see, and I think I will see it in India as well. If I go to India, I think I will see it as well in India. I might see it better in India. So like me personally, I walk everywhere. I like walking. But if you have to go far enough, if you have to go 100 miles, you're not going to walk.
You're not going to walk. All right.
So how are you going to, you're in Mumbai and you want to visit the family village that's 100 miles outside of Mumbai. And what are your choices of how to get there? Right? There's some train where you have to climb up on the roof because it's so crowded. You can rent a car and it's outrageously expensive. You can pay a driver, it's outrageously expensive. You can get on a bus and it's really slow and it's really inconvenient. Like, can I come up with a solution that's safer than a tuk-tuk, safer than a moped, safer than a scooter, safer than a bicycle, more efficient, cleaner, probably doesn't cost less than the train or the bus, but it's a hell of a lot more convenient and a hell of a lot more comfortable.
Yeah.
Even if it's not as comfortable as riding in the back of a Model 3, right? I'm not saying it's that comfortable, but can I make it more comfortable than riding on a crowded bus or crowded train?
Right? So you're kind of taking inspiration from Elon's overall goal of changing, sustainable energy for humanity, and you're using that as a stepping stone.
And the overall idea of how do we do this? How do we drive costs down?
Right.
How do we make it as simple as possible?
Right.
And I can operate without constraints when building prototypes. And then we get to a certain point and somebody says, wait a minute, that needs to pass a crash test. Okay, well, now we need to pass a crash test. Let's figure out how we modify this thing so it passes a crash test. Right?
Right.
I can afford to play for a couple of years with silly prototype ideas. But, and I don't think the market for what I want to do is going to, you have this question, when does Robotaxi become real? It might be 2025. But I think it's a reasonably safe bet that 2026, 2027, you're going to see a Robotaxi network somewhere. So I need a vehicle that's ready to operate in a Robotaxi network when the Robotaxi is ready for vehicles to operate in it. And so I have a 3-year window or so, let's say, where I can, and it could be a 4 or 5-year window because nobody's going to make a vehicle as inexpensive as mine. So as long as I get close in a few years, I have potential. And if I'm wrong and I screw up and I burned $100,000, I had fun doing it.
And I think that's the thing about Elon as well, going back to Twitter. It's like, if it fails, it's like, all right, I spent 44 billion, whatever. And it's like the nature of just having that personality, like, if I fucked up and I spent half of 100 billion, it's whatever. it gives you the expectation and inspiration to kind of like actually pull it off. Because you can't be scared to lose $100,000 on a stupid idea.
Right.
If you are, there's no chance for it to succeed in the first place.
And you can't be scared to lose $100,000 on a stock you believe in either.
Which is why Warren says you should buy the dip fund. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But if someone asked, hey, Warren, should I buy some stock? I think you would say at this price, given the haircut we've seen, it's not too bad.
If you have free cash, I would simply ask the question, what's a better stock to buy than Tesla? If you're investing for the next 10 years, next 5-10 years, what stock is a better stock to buy? I think there's a credible case for Nvidia, right? I think that Nvidia is likely to grow. I think they're priced pretty high, right? But I think Nvidia has a really, really promising future. I can't say I haven't done a deep dive on Nvidia to decide whether it would be worth investing because I'm just sold on Tesla. We talked about Palantir before. Like I don't understand Palantir well enough to say whether it's a good investment or not. I love Peter Thiel. I love Alex Karp. I think they're great guys. I just don't understand the business story.
But whenever you say that, I also think that's where the alpha is. Because if you don't get it, maybe legitimately there is some alpha there, right? For the people who do get it.
Right. But I'm not going to all in invest on a stock that I don't understand. I'm all in on Tesla because I do understand it. And, like people have said, would you buy SpaceX stock? Well, I've had the opportunity to buy SpaceX stock. But when I've had the opportunity to invest in SpaceX, I should say, but when I've had the opportunity, it's been like you buying into a fund that owns shares of Tesla or owns shares of a fund that owns Tesla, and you're paying 2% a year management fee on the fund. You're paying a 6% permission to buy in, and you're going to pay a 20% carried interest fee when you have a liquidity event. And I can buy Tesla stock, and I think it's going to grow just as much as SpaceX without having to pay all those fees. So, and same thing with Boring Company. I did have an opportunity to buy into Boring Company. It was like, well, I somewhat regret not pulling the trigger on Boring Company when I had the opportunity, because I think Boring Company is going to 1000x. But those are investments where your money's locked up and you can't get it out. Like there's no liquidity.
Right.
So you have to have a lot of cash to be able to dump, let's say, $100,000 in the Boring Company or SpaceX or Neuralink. You got to have a big chunk of money to be able to buy that investment. And being able to write out, you can't sell that for 10 years.
This is an awesome 2 hours, Warren. This is awesome. This is great. Thank you for doing this. I haven't had a full conversation with you on the channel, just one-on-one. I think it was great. We got through a lot of topics. Timestamps are in the description. Warren's YouTube and Twitter, and now Amazon book is in the description as well. Please make sure to follow him everywhere. Shelby hits the fan. And yeah, look, I appreciate it because we had some bearish takes over the past couple of days, but look, I know people think I'm like a Tesla bear just because I don't own the stock, because I have some other companies I like better, like a Palantir that I think I understand better. But I think long-term to bet against Elon is just, it's the biggest mistake someone can make. That doesn't mean they have to buy the stock, but to be publicly like, no, Tesla's going to crash. It's going to be $24. Like, I just think it's silly long-term.
Yep. All right.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.